Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, October 5th, 2017. Time for yet another show. Bill is already prepared for it up in Portland, Maine, and tweets for us. The Daily Kos Radio is live. This is your warning, everybody. Is Trump still an effing moron? You bet. I can tell you right off the bat. But as the tweet says, Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Hi, I'm your host today. Surveys the swamp, so you don't have to. I don't know why you would want to, but if you want it surveyed for you, I'll check it out. Morning tweets today. Let's see. Donald Trump in a rage, as usual this morning. Wants to know why the Senate isn't investigating all this fake news that's out there, and we got to do something about it. Of course, I have been myself upset at the laxity of the Senate Dotard Committee for getting around to investigating what the hell's going on in the White House. And, of course, a day later, we're still on the Rex Tillerson has said that Donald Trump is an effing moron story. Rex Tillerson, Donald Trump reminds us, has never threatened to resign. It's fake news put out by NBC, low news and reporting standards, no verification from me. But as we are reminded this morning by, was it Preet Bharara who put that out? That's right. This all comes from a man, as he reminds us, who told Alex Jones, "Your reputation is amazing." Alex Jones, of course, also said Sandy Hook didn't happen. I love the way this is phrased. Also 9/11. Also Apollo 11. All the 11s he has a problem with, I guess. Yeah, the president's an idiot, I guess. I don't need to tell you that. But that's what the show's about, so I guess but it might as well get around to it at some point. Lots more being discussed today, lots of stories in pocket, lots of stories in the queue from Greg Dworkin, who will join us shortly. I'm okay on breakfast today, Greg, so everything's fine. Take your time, and we'll survey the damages from the night before. What other fun things are there going on? I don't know. Let's take a look around and see what we can find out. And what's happening on the popular front this morning? I don't know. There's no unifying themes on Twitter. Everybody just pretty much still pretty sure that Donald Trump is an idiot. Here comes Greg now, as a matter of fact. I guess he's ready. He's ready and rearing to go. There must be a whole lot of news or something. I have not been able to focus on it all this morning, pushing the kids out the door. But you know how that is. We'll catch up shortly and soon enough. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
We're doing great.
Okay, good. That's news item number one.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we come on a little early to help you get breakfast. Sometimes it's because I have to get out the door.
That is a good reason, too.
You know, sometimes it just is.
The doors rule.
So, the professional thing about what David and I do is that we don't plan any of this except on the fly. And, of course, it shows. Yeah, I get that. But, it's still fun. I still just love getting up in the morning on the days that I'm on the show and talking with my friend David. It's funny. You were talking about Donald Trump's tweets. I have actually put aside the tweet of this morning. Why isn't the Senate Intel Committee looking into the fake news networks in our country to see why so much of our news is just made up fake? And he didn't, but he could have easily added that with fake, fakety, McFake, fake. I mean, he's used that word in about 10 of his last 12 tweets. And he's clearly upset about the fact that the Intel Committee and maybe Mueller, Bobby Three Sticks, and all the other people who were looking into his affairs are just getting closer and closer to his core business, which is lying, cheating, and stealing.
Yes.
Which, of course, is why that story about how Jared and Ivanka almost got indicted, except Cyrus Vance got enough money from the Trump organization, so he decided to back off.
Yeah.
And that they say that's not how it happened, but it sure looks like that's how it happened.
I see. All right. Well, that's not. I'd be interested to know how they think it happened, but I have not seen an explanation yet.
Cyrus Vance coincidentally just happened to look at the data and decided, against the advice of all of his prosecutors, that there wasn't enough there to prosecute.
Okay.
And
well,
these
that's
things
just that they do. from time to time happen. I want to go back to that story, mostly not so much for what happened with Cyrus Vance, but the fact that the whole building, this story tells us that this whole building was a money laundering scheme from top to bottom. And if we get a chance, we'll explain all of that later on.
Anyway, so I just, another story caught my eye just because of the headline. Sometimes headlines do make you read stories.
That's all they do for me. I don't read a
And
lot.
this was Max Boot, and he's writing today in USA Today. He writes at various places.
Yes.
Max Boot writes, the headline, "Is Donald Trump a moron? Duh."
Okay. Oh, I thought that was you when you said it yesterday.
Oh, that's the headline, so I had to,
Okay.
I absolutely had to click on that.
Yeah, okay. Max Boot. Is that real? Okay.
Yeah, that's his real name.
Fine. Why don't I get something like that? Okay.
Ask Garance, whether that's a real name or not.
I'll ask Garance.
So we've reached the stage of the Trump presidency when the Secretary of State has to call a news conference to deny that he called the president a moron. And then doesn't actually deny it. That was the funny thing about it. He never said, "I didn't say that." People asked about it and said, "That's the reason the whole headline here is that the moron thing. What's going on with the moron thing?" Well, that's really being petty. I'm not from Washington. I don't understand this petty stuff. The story is you said he was the moron. What are you going to say about it? I'm not talking about that.
That is amazing that he wouldn't just say, "No, I didn't say that."
What was the point of the press conference? Press conference obviously wasn't for the reporters. It was for Trump.
Yeah, I guess he should have a little Rex Tillerson like ventriloquist dummy. He's walking around.
Well, this whole cabinet, that's why we were talking about how, they were, undoubtedly at some point going to have to do one of those fealty things again.
I guess so. Everyone gets to praise him and, give him little gifts or something.
Right. So what Trump said is the NBC News story has just been totally refuted by Secretary Tillerson and Vice President Pence.
Oh, yeah.
It's fake news. It's another one of his fake news things. They should issue an apology to America.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be right on it.
But not quite, says Matt Booth.
Oh.
Tillerson did deny the report that he considered resigning this summer and that Vice President Pence talked him out of it. But when asked whether he had called Trump a moron, all he said was, "I'm not going to deal with petty stuff like this." Translation, he did call him a moron. Of course, NBC, Stephanie Rule, had sources that said there really does need to be a correction to that because what he actually called him was an effing moron. I can't use that word on the radio. And so that's actually what he said.
Whoops.
And so then there was a whole...
He's right then.
Yeah, he's right. But then there was a whole line of speculation. This is the part I hate about the press.
Oh.
Is it proper for a Secretary of State to say that about your boss and still keep his job? Let's talk about protocol. And so they spend the whole rest of the day talking about the protocol and optics of that.
Okay.
Instead of, why did he call him a moron? Because he's an effing moron. Let's talk about that. And they just go out of their way to try to avoid talking about that. Anything. He's coming to Las Vegas. He's going to read a speech that's going to be from the heart, somebody else's heart, because somebody else wrote the speech. And he'll say something, and they'll say, "Oh, my, how presidential. Look, the guy has no empathy. It doesn't matter what he says. It doesn't matter what he reads from a piece of paper. It isn't true. And it doesn't matter that he is trying to convince reporters, if not foreign leaders, that he's so crazy that you have to deal with him because you don't know what he's going to do next, and somehow that's to his advantage."
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, foreign leaders all over the world, that's what makes them foreign leaders,
They're everywhere.
Are stepping back and saying, you know what, he's an effing moron.
Yes.
And unlike our courtiers in the American press, they feel perfectly free to just go ahead and say it.
Right. Well, they don't get paid by him.
Right.
They're
One
doing
of
the
the
paying.
most frustrating things is trying to follow this story and watch the media twist it away from the core point. Which is why Max Boot's piece and his headline struck me.
Yes. Well, among a number of reasons, I would think.
Getting back to the core part of it.
And Rex Tillerson is the guy who's such good friends with Vladimir Putin, too, right?
So at the same briefing that he was talking about to Puerto Rico, he said you can be very proud, everybody around this table, everybody watching can be really proud of what's taking place in Puerto Rico because fewer people died than during Hurricane Katrina. So Puerto Ricans should be proud of the catastrophe.
Good job.
It's like New Yorkers that they could be proud that 9/11 didn't kill as many people as the atomic bombing of Hiroshima.
Have a good time,
Little wonder, Max Boot says. He's a foreign policy guy. Little wonder that only 32% of respondents in a recent poll approved that Trump's handling disaster relief in the U.S. territory. His overall approval ratings aren't much higher. The real scandal isn't that Trump's Secretary of State called him a moron. It's that his job performance lends so much credence to the description. Thank you, Max Boot. That's the whole point, really.
Oh. Yes. Well, I mean, in the abstract, plenty of people call him a moron.
I know he has right-wing views of foreign policy. But, some of the never-Trumpers really are just better at describing exactly what's going on, and they at least can escape it's partisan. No, actually, they're Republicans, or they used to be.
Yeah, that's true. That's what makes it worth having their opinions of it.
There was a Senate Intel Committee discussion, which got Trump's tweet going.
Oh.
Because Richard Burr, the Republican chairman and the ranking member, Mark Warner, came out and said, collusion's still an open question. It's not settled.
Okay.
And there was other discussion of the fact that the Intel Committee was not getting the British dossier from the British spy, Steele, I think his name is.
Yes, right.
They were not really going to deal with that, they said the other day.
Oh.
This morning, there's a piece in Reuters, special counsel leading probe into Trump dossier, that alleged ties between Russia and the president's campaign. So, in other words, the reason that the Intel Committee isn't doing it is because Mueller's doing it.
Well, yeah. Why duplicate the work?
Well, also Mueller won't release that, won't let them do it. The committee and Mueller's investigation are cooperating. But if there's certain specific pieces of evidence, sometimes the investigating group from Mueller's side just decides they're the ones that are going to, keep it. Okay.
Well, I'm glad somebody's investigating it. I do see that there's a widely shared and highly recommended Daily Coast diary. We'll have to delve into it. That says the PP tape may well be coming. So maybe that's it. Finally, they'll corroborate that.
We'll see. I'll believe it when I see it. That's not one that I'm holding up for an open. But a lot of the pieces that were in that dossier do turn out to be true. So let's just step back a little bit and look at the big overall environment here.
Okay.
Right? Two pieces help to illustrate that. One is from Politico. Angry GOP donors close their wallets.
Good.
I think maybe last week or even at the beginning of the week we talked about a piece that said they were threatening to. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that it gives a little bit of insight into what do these guys want. They're already rich as Croesus. I realize that when you're that greedy, you want everything. I get that part. Yes, but what are they pushing for? So what the article says in Politico, I'm sick and tired of nothing happening. One contributor says of the party's legislative failures. But what does that mean? Some of them, it's about Obamacare.
Oh, all right.
Why is it about Obamacare? What do they care? Because it frees up money to cut taxes. It's Sheldon Adelson here is in the article, the party's most prominent donor, because they mention his name all the time, who's privately expressed frustration that the president hasn't moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. You have people who are in the energy sector. Obviously, they want less regulation. They can make more money.
Okay.
There's agribusiness. And the agribusiness guy, Bruce Rastetter of Iowa, has the ear of Grassley and Ernst. And as it says here, because you have to remember, these guys are really not all that smart when it comes to politics. But they have a lot of money, so you have to listen to them and pretend they're wise.
All right.
And the article says, in the world of campaign politics, big donors have long been known as gripers, an exclusive group accustomed to stroking and attention. But this year is different. Veteran fundraisers, that is to say the strokers and the attention givers, say they're having an unusually hard time setting up meetings with major contributors, lining up checks, and organizing events. One seasoned GOP fundraiser forwarded along a curt email from a sought-after donor. The GOP leader should know no movement on remaining agenda. Tax reform, infrastructure, deregulation means no funding from supporters like me. No meetings, no calls, no contributions. until we see progress.
Okay.
So the figures turning off the cash spigot range from mid-level donors to some of the most generous contributors whom the party has long relied on. Among those who've been cool to outreach are venture capitalist John Childs, real estate developer Harlan Crow, retail executive Les Wexner, and all of these have funneled millions of dollars to the party over the years. It's a real mess. The resentment over the state of the party has infiltrated Republican fundraising capitals like Dallas. Last week, GOP runoff for Alabama Senate only heightened the sense of frustration. $8 million was dropped by a McConnell super PAC, and that's where a lot of that money would go, for example, because you're limited, of course, by individual donations to stop nobody from giving more money if they feel like it to the party.
Right.
They blew all the resources in Alabama for basically nothing. So these are guys that expect that if they pay you money, you're supposed to deliver what it is that they're asking for. And you always have to step back and ask the question, why is Sheldon Adelson keep spending all this money on his one goal, which is moving the capital to Jerusalem, when in fact it's not going to happen? And the answer is just because he's rich doesn't mean he's smart.
Well, that we know is true. Yes, somebody did make a good point the other day about one of the main reasons why extraordinarily wealthy or successful businessmen, and I suppose this would apply to businesswomen too, but we haven't given them much of a chance, why they just make such terrible public servants, and it has to do with the fact that their entire lives revolve around surrounding themselves with yes men and sycophants, and it's difficult for them to deal with real people or to understand that sometimes just throwing money at something doesn't get a result.
Or, the way they take criticism and react to it and such, and it's all true. I mean, you'd think that you'd learn a little bit from the crisis managers, but then again, you realize that actually these are folks who are accustomed to have everything done for them, and they're not used to doing it themselves. Yeah. So if they have to go out and do their own crisis management, all of a sudden they don't look like the super hyper competent CEOs that they've paid people to make that image of.
Yeah, I don't understand. I put the bag of money with a dollar sign on it here. Why am I not getting my thing? Usually, and there are private businesses where it doesn't really matter very much. You can just pay somebody enough money and they'll lie about the results of the new program in your company and you'll feel great and, walk
Speaking
away.
of which, speaking of that, did you see, and this is hysterical, and this actually happened, it wasn't a Photoshop from what I understand, the House was having hearings on the no-bid Equifax contract.
Yes.
That's supposed to be given because Equifax is going to help them with some kind of security thing. I wasn't even paying attention to what Equifax was supposed to do.
No one knows.
But during the hearing, a guy dressed like Mr. Moneybags from Monopoly,
yes,
with the long white handlebar mustache, the monocle, the hat, snuck into the hearing. And so all during the time that the people who were getting grilled were talking, this guy is sitting behind them and slightly to the right, twirling his mustache.
Yes.
And it was hysterical watching this. It was like a super A+ trolling thing.
Yeah, it was great.
He didn't have to say anything. He looked exactly like the Monopoly guy.
Right. You can raise your eyebrows and have your monocle pop out and all this stuff. I wondered whether I saw him and I figured this must be one of the people who used to perform, I guess we would say, regularly as the billionaires for Bush, and they love to dress up. Well, really, and they end up looking like Monopoly people or
I know, but my first
Howell.
thought when I saw that is this guy is like the Secretary of Commerce or something. Right?
Yeah, he has no mustache to twirl, that guy. But yeah, they do a great job. One of my favorite performance stunt groups out there. I wondered whether he might be affiliated with them. But yeah, it was a real live American left-wing troll out there doing what needs to be done and getting viral attention for the idiocy of Equifax top brass and their thievery and the ridiculousness of awarding them new contracts.
Now, did we just not say on the show 2 days ago that this was the Mona Lisa presidency where the optics and the pictures really matter?
We did
that
about
story,
Mona Lisa.
and this is exactly an illustration of that.
Yeah. Well, it's a great. They do great work. They are in the right place at the right time, And they've made viral news before, so I expect big things from them. I hope that you know what? I don't know. I'm not certain that they're affiliated. If not, great. It's proliferating, and more people are getting the hint that that kind of stuff works.
Right. I don't know who did it, but as I say, I don't even. It's not on my radar in terms of what the hearing was about, but it was hysterically funny and certainly got the point. So that's the Republican donor and the money bags part of it.
Yeah.
And then last night, early this morning, poll comes out from the Washington Post. Democrat Northam leads Republican Gillespie in race for Virginia governor, new poll finds. This is a Washington Post poll.
That is good.
And Northam leads Gillespie by 53-40 among likely voters.
I need 100 to nothing.
But that's a pretty big lead, with 4% supporting Libertarian Cliff Hydra. I keep reading that as Hydra. El Hydra. I expect him to be one of those guys. And for all I know, he is. He's just doing this on purpose to troll us. The advantage is similar to a post-Sharp school poll this spring, but larger than other public polls of likely voters released over the past month. A lot of these polls are showing either a tie or Northam ahead. I don't think there's any poll that shows Gillespie ahead. Okay. So the lead that Northam has is anywhere between 1 and 13 points. It's probably closer to 1 than it is 13. And they, in the Washington Post, say the race is still fluid, with a sizable number of likely voters saying they could change their mind before November 7th. But you get the feeling that Northam is ahead because Gillespie is starting to do the desperate, let's put a lot of anti-immigrant other stuff up on the airwaves. I don't know that you're seeing all that.
I'm not personally.
But keep an eye on that because a lot of that stuff is coming. I'm told that Gillespie has quite a lot of nasty ads on and coming, and you do that when you're behind and you feel like you have to make up some ground.
Yeah.
Now, Patrick Ruffini, who is a Republican, has this morning a quick thread on the Virginia governor and why polls might be unusually over the map and how this might impact the final result. The short answer is it's all about turnout.
Sure. True.
Right. In certain races in the recent past, Republicans have turned out and other Democrats have. So sometimes what happens is, like, if Obama's president, the GOP is the one counting on off-year turnout.
Yes.
So Ruffini says, remember, he's a Republican. One conclusion we can draw is that turnout is driven by candidate quality. There was an exceptional Republican turnout for McDonnell, was it? Oh. The guy who was indicted and then convicted, and then the conviction was overturned.
Yes, that's the guy. Well, one of the guys.
And Cuccinelli came close, but he was seen as underperforming. So this isn't a normal election, Ruffini says. Turnout swings wildly. Try to track this with voter file polls and analytics polls, not the random digit dialing polls. Now, why that particular comment? Remember what I said the other day about Stan Greenberg writing all these nasty things about the Clinton campaign in terms of how they performed poorly in the last week and they didn't do polling?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Let me go back and read that again in that context. Trust voter file polls and analytics polls where you can, not random digit dialing. Ruffini is saying here the regular old polls that you're all used to that Stan Greenberg does aren't going to help you because they don't really look at turnout. And that's the whole argument between the traditional pollsters and the new guys. And that's one of the reasons why Stan Greenberg's piece was so bitter. Not because the Clinton campaign was so incompetent, but because it's a old-fashioned poller versus the new way of doing things. And a lot of that kind of seeped into what his writing was about.
Okay.
And here's a great example of it. Here's a young guy saying, don't pay attention to the polls. At least not the traditional ones. They're not telling you what's going on because they don't tell you about turnout.
Well, there's a certain amount of logic to it that was lacking.
On both sides. And Greenberg's not completely wrong, and Ruffini's not completely right. I'm just I'm bringing up yet again, there is that dynamic, and you always have to figure that when you're reading the, quote, analysis, or I should say air quotes around the neutral analysis.
I see.
Before you actually try to figure the analysis, you got to figure out what kind of person this is. Is it a traditional pollster? You kind of already know where they're coming from.
I'm just differentiating him from the other young-ish Republican people who say don't believe the polls because they're skewed.
Right. Ruffini's more data-driven.
Yes.
And I find his analysis a little bit more credible.
It's more data-driven than that other guy who just was unskewing things based on, I wish they looked this way.
Yeah, that was just dumb.
Yes. He's a little bit dumb, Ruffini, but not that dumb.
Right. And as we come up to the break, but not quite there yet, I'm just going to finish up and leave you with two pieces here, which I think were just interesting. This is Ed Young, one of my absolute favorite science writers, writing in The Atlantic, The Absurdity of the Nobel Prizes in Science, he writes. They distort the nature of the scientific enterprise, rewrite its history, and overlook many of its most important contributors. As an example, there's a gravity wave Nobel that was given in physics to three guys who discovered gravitational waves, but there's hundreds of authors on a 3-page long author list that went with this, but they only award it to 3 people. Ed Young's point is doing so distorts the way science is actually done and rewards some people and lowers others. And it's basically unfair and absurd, and it's a holdover from the 100-year ago days when people worked by themselves.
Is there a reason that they do? Is there a reason? Is there some kind of limit to the number of people they can fit on a stage or something?
Yeah,
or?
3 at most. You only get the Nobels. You can only give 3. So if you have a 7-person team, only 3 of them are getting the Nobel.
Is that really? That's the actual limit?
I think so. The wider problem beyond who should have received the prize and who should not is Nobels reward individuals, 3 at most, for each of the scientific prizes in any given year.
Okay.
And modern science is the teamiest of team sports.
That seems unscientific to limit it that way.
Researchers sometimes make solo breakthroughs, but it's increasingly rare. And that's why the whole article is so interesting. It's just not one of those things you normally go around thinking about.
No, I don't spend any time.
My job is to bring up think pieces.
Thank you. I'm glad you did. Maybe it's that they only have 3 of those tuxedos at the rental place.
That could be.
That's the only reason I can think of. Otherwise, science is just stupid. Which might be true. Okay. Well,
the most famous, of course, is Watson and Crick, but not Rosalind Franklin.
Okay. That's just 2 guys. All right. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. We got 10 seconds of music left. We'll let it play itself out here, and we are rejoined once again by Greg Dworkin, who's got just a few minutes before scooting off to work. What else is new? You got to tell me something to do with the rest of the show, Greg.
I'm going to finish up on this Nobel thing, which is a long piece, but well worth reading. And I did a companion piece about really looking into Watson, Crick, and Rosalind Franklin. Franklin died 4 years before Watson and Crick won the Nobel. And the rules are you got to be alive. So she lost out on hers because she didn't live long enough. Because by the time Nobel was ready to be done, I think people were starting to recognize her contributions.
Nobel
she did a lot of the X-ray
dead,
crystallography.
I don't know exactly why that rule would apply either.
But why they say it's only 3, but the rules are the rules, right?
Yes.
And then there's another piece here, a paragraph that says, in many cases, the prizes are about who has survived full stop. Nobel Prizes cannot be awarded posthumously. So Rosalind Franklin was not recognized for her pivotal role in discovering the double helical structure of DNA because she died 4 years before the Nobel was awarded to James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins. Astronomer Vera Rubin, by the way, if Watson, Crick, and Wilkins get it, there's your 3.
Yes.
So
even
you get knocked out, even if you are alive. Astronomer Vera Rubin provided evidence for the existence of dark matter by studying the way in which galaxies rotate, a feat that revolutionized our understanding of the universe. Vera Rubin deserves a Nobel, said science writer Rachel Feltman in October 2016. She probably won't get one in time, and she died 2 months later, Rubin did. So there's that part of it. And then Rubin and Franklin point to another long-standing issue with the Nobels, and I think this is important, inasmuch as they propagate the myth that the lone genius is always white and male, or almost always. Women have won just 12 of the 214 prizes in physiology or medicine, just 4 of the 175 prizes in chemistry, and just 2 of the 204 prizes in physics. The most recent female physics laureate Maria Gropert-Meyer won her prize 54 years ago. It's not for lack of potential honorees. And perhaps none of this would matter if the Nobels weren't such a massive deal. Beyond the monetary value of the prize, laureates are virtually guaranteed a stream of lucrative speaking gigs. Yes. Their paper garners more citations. They tend to live for a year or two longer than people who are nominated but didn't win.
Huh.
Maybe that's a frustration factor. And the award imprints them with a permanent imprimatur of greatness. The Nobel Prize is not a MacArthur Genius Grant, which is awarded to people who show exceptional creativity. It recognizes a particular discovery, and yet the discoverer is forever billed as an intellectual force in their own right, creating an equivalence between one historical contribution and their entire portfolio of ideas forevermore. Just a really nice piece that makes you think about what's going on.
That's
more to it there. And, of course, a lot more to the Crick, Watson, and Rosalind Franklin data. I have a piece from The Guardian looking over that. A lot of the stories about Rosalind Franklin have to do with the fact that Watson was such a jerk.
Oh?
And quite a bit of a misogynist. And so sometimes it's even too far. In other words, they didn't steal her work. She offered it. But she definitely got the short end of the stick in regard to the recognition. And, I work in medicine. I happen to know a lot of brilliant women doctors who happen to be brilliant doctors. But, there's still, unfortunately, in every profession, and if not where I work, where I don't see it, I'm the male, so maybe I don't see as much of it. But there's still way too much patting on the head, tut-tut little girl and that kind of thing. And it's just completely inappropriate. And the science, the medicine, the rest of the world doesn't always give women the credit that they are due. And the Nobels are one perfect example. So that's my piece for today to wrap up. Thank you so much for hearing me out. I'll be back on Monday. And we'll see what kind of mess the world has gotten into between now and then so we can straighten it out.
Okay.
Take care. This is my friend David Waldman's show, Kagro in the Morning, and I'm Greg Dworkin speaking with him as I do many mornings. Take care and have a great rest of the week.
Okay. Thanks very much, Greg. Lots of eye-opening information there. Now, when I never would have, if it wasn't for the article, I guess I wouldn't. I don't pay enough attention. Someone won the Nobel Prize? Great. Fantastic. But the good points being made about how that sort of gives all the rest of your work the imprimatur of the genius that won you the Nobel Prize, even if there wasn't any particular genius that won it for you. That is interesting. You get it for a particular discovery, so you could, I guess, almost win by accident, I suppose. I mean, you still have to have the science to back it up. But what a weird rule. Like we didn't have enough ink, so therefore, only 3 people can win. There's not enough room on the page. Now, of course, with the internet and everything, it's free to list all the people who were involved in the research. Why you can't win it posthumously, I don't know. The prize is named for a guy who's, I think, worldwide known as a dead person. But I guess the prize isn't going to him, so I guess it's all right. I don't know what the hang-up on posthumous prizes is, except maybe they didn't want to get caught up in the court battles over what to do with the money. I don't know. They just like to have a show. There needs to be somebody there to bow and take the money from the king of Norway and or Sweden, depending on which Nobel Prize you're accepting. And, all because the guy felt bad about inventing TNT. I'm not so sure that these rules should stick. I think it might be time for them to revamp them, and I guess that's what the Atlantic piece and the Guardian's piece probably likewise are all about. Is it possible to nominate someone posthumously for a Nobel? What, for just to nominate them for the prize? That's the question that Greg is asking here. Is Greg asking it, or who's asking this question? I'm trying to catch up on things here. Okay, let's see. Is it possible to nominate someone for a posthumous Nobel Prize? No, it is not possible. The answer is what he's sending me. It's not possible to nominate someone for a posthumous Nobel Prize. Previously, a person could be awarded a prize posthumously if he or she had already been nominated before February 1 of the same year, which was true of, Eric Axel Karlfeldt, Nobel Prize in Literature in 1931, and Dag Hammarskjöld, the Nobel Peace Prize in in 1961. Effective 1974, however, the prize from that date forward may only go to a deceased person to whom the prize was already awarded, usually in October, but who had died before he or she could receive the prize on the 10th of December. What are we looking at here? William Vickery, the 1996 Sveriges Riksbank Prize. Oh my goodness, who's Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. Is that the Nobel Prize for Economics? Okay. Well, all right. Very interesting. Well, it's the point here, I guess, is that there can be changes made to precedent, but how to do it, I don't know. First of all, you got to have a white tie and tails, I suppose, and then you got to sit down and be able to speak in the various languages of the gang there assembled for putting the prize together. I suppose it helps them in some way, like narrow things down. I suppose the decision-making process is grueling enough as it is, and if they can winnow the field out by people who are dead, you don't feel like you're disappointing anybody. Maybe that's it. The Monopoly Moneybags guy could be a representative there, too. That's right. He could go there. Greg nominates... what do they call him? Uncle Pennybags? Is that something with I don't know. Who knows? The Monopoly guy is the way I know him and the way you know him too. And he can go and vote himself the Nobel Prize. Someone, can you be an effing moron or a dotard and win the Nobel Peace Prize? I'm curious about that one. I don't know. Let's dive into the rest of the stories for the day. As fascinating as the Nobel Prize story is, I don't know if I can add more to it than just reading it, and you know where to find it by now. And if you don't, you'll find it in Scott Anderson's roundup of the day, and we'll be happy to provide that to you. Let's see. Speaking as we did of Donald Trump and his rage tweeting, there was a noticeable lack of rage tweeting about the Las Vegas shootings, and we might get some insight on why that is, although I suspect that you already know what the answer is. From Nancy Letourneau, who writes at the Washington Monthly, she has this piece entitled, "How Did Trump Respond to White-on-White Violence?" Because that's what we were looking at. Nobody has a vertical on that on their websites as far as I know. White crime? Maybe we ought to start that. All right. Here's what she has to say. If all you knew about Donald Trump was his remarks in response to the Las Vegas shooting, you'd be a very happy person. You might be impressed. I don't know if that's the case. I wouldn't go that far, but I get your point. Here are his remarks on the situation, I guess, excerpted here. We call upon the bonds that unite us, our faith, our family, and our shared values. This, you can see somebody else wrote this. We call upon the bonds of citizenship, the bonds of community, and the comfort of our common humanity. Our unity cannot be shattered by evil. Our bonds cannot be broken by violence. And though we feel such great anger at the senseless murder of our fellow citizens, it is our love that defines us today and always will, forever. In times such as these, I know we are searching for some kind of meaning in the chaos, some kind of light in the darkness. The answers do not come easy, but we can take solace knowing that even the darkest space can be brightened by a single light, and even the most terrible despair can be illuminated by a single ray of hope. Well, that's the speech. This morning, there were no rage tweets, she notes, only this. This would have been yesterday morning, of course. Or maybe it was the day before. This is dated October 3rd. There was only this tweet. I am so proud of our great country, capitalized, doy. God bless America. But that is a very different reaction than we've seen from him in the past. And here another excerpt, this time from a Washington Post story. During his campaign, Trump made the shooting in San Bernardino, California, which was carried out by Islamic radicals, a centerpiece of his proposal to ban all Muslims from entering the United States. I would handle it so tough, you don't want to hear, he boasted days after the attack. That is so perfectly Trump. If you have any doubt in your mind, I don't know what you're doing living in the United States of America, and you have any doubt in your mind about whether or not he wrote that speech when you hear his idiotic response to something like San Bernardino. I would handle it so tough you don't want to hear. I don't want to hear. You're right about that. It's the correct thing you've said all day. And Trump reacted to the shooting in Orlando at the Pulse nightclub with self-praise, of course, because that's how he reacts to everything, suggesting that the incident was a symptom of weak democratic policies. Appreciate the congrats for being right on radical Islamic terrorism, he tweeted the day after. In other words, as soon as he heard about the Pulse shooting, he said, Islamic terrorism. Having no basis for the guess, he was happy to have lucked out the next day. The only guy celebrating the Pulse shooting, Donald Trump. This is the same president who, at the Republican convention, said this: our convention occurs at a moment of crisis for our nation. Again, obviously something written for him. The attacks on our police and the terrorism in our cities threaten our very way of life. Any politician who does not grasp this danger is not fit to lead our country, ironically enough. Americans watching this address tonight have seen the recent images of violence in our streets. No, they haven't. And the chaos in our communities. Many have witnessed this violence personally. Some have even been its victims. I have a message for all of you. The crime and violence that today afflicts our nation will soon come to an end. Beginning on January 20th, 2017, safety will be restored. He kept us safe. Ladies and gentlemen, there was no Las Vegas shooting. He is also the only one who, during his inaugural speech, talked about the crime, drugs, and gangs that have stolen so many lives and suggested that the carnage stops here and now. These have been the themes Trump has focused on since he began his presidential campaign by suggesting that Mexican immigrants were criminals, rapists, and drug dealers. Since he came into office, this is the president who set up a special unit at the Department of Homeland Security to support the victims of crime perpetrated by immigrants, but eliminated funding for the group that was countering white radicalization. At a time when Black Lives Matter was raising awareness about police brutality against African Americans, he called for law enforcement to get rough. That is the context in which we have to put the president's remarks yesterday. Of course, the one difference between then and now is that the Las Vegas shooting was perpetrated by a white man, whose victims were predominantly white people. All of a sudden, there was no talk of carnage, even though this was the most carnage we had ever seen. But no talk of carnage, combined with promises of a swift and sure response. Instead, we hear about searching for meaning, in which the answers do not come easy. I would actually applaud Trump's remarks yesterday if I thought for a second that they would be replicated if the shooter was black, brown, or Muslim. We have enough experience with this president to be certain that would never have happened. If you want to know what a white supremacist looks like, a pretty good indicator would be the different way they respond to white-on-white violence. I think that's true, and that's why I opted to read the piece to you. Nancy Letourneau, there for the Washington Monthly and the political animal space that they have there. Let's see, another series of messages from Greg, who has more suggestions about topics for the show, and that's always a good thing and a good idea. Oh, Jennifer Rubin, really? Okay, well, we'll see what's up here. And some excerpts and something from the Hill as well. Hey, okay, let's take a look. Jennifer Rubin. It's going to take some special circumstances to bring her intentionally into the show, non-ironically. Every lawmaker should agree with Bob Corker of Tennessee, on this, by Jennifer Rubin. All right. Let's see what it is. Here. Oh, the excerpt was from that. Okay. The Hill reports. She's just telling us what the Hill reports. What the Hill reports? Senator Bob Corker, who is retiring after next year, raised the stakes on what he expects from the nascent GOP, or GOP, tax reform plan on Wednesday, saying he would not vote for a plan that was temporary or raised the deficit. Well, that's out the window then, I guess, because it says right in the reconciliation instructions that it's going to, and in a huge way. The Hill continues reporting here. Speaking at the Senate Budget Committee's markup of the budget, which will unlock the process Republicans want to use to pass the reform, reconciliation, Corker said he would not vote for a final bill unless it, quote, reduces deficits and does not add to deficits with reasonable and responsible growth models, and unless we can make it permanent, I don't have any interest in it. Now, why the article continues after that point, I have no idea, because they tell you outright in the budget what the plan is for the deficit. We are going to add $1.5 trillion to the, well, I guess to the debt. And of course, you're only going to be able to do that if you add to the deficit year after year along the way. So what this would mean, if it holds water, is Bob Corker is a no on the budget. I mean, it's right there in front of you. I don't know why he doesn't just say, I'm a no. Okay. That common sense statement, don't add to the gargantuan debt and don't kick the can down the road. I don't know. I mean, it passes for a common sense statement. She's not wrong in that this is commonly thought to be common sense, but she is wrong about it being particularly common or common sense, no matter how you look at it. And anyway, we don't need to get off into Arliss Bunny's modern monetary theory discussion at this point. That so-called, I guess, common sense statement, don't add to the gargantuan debt and don't kick the can down the road, forcing some other Congress to pay for it, is about the most conservative statement, and she puts that in bunny ears quotes, that we've heard since the budget sloganeering began. How so? It's fiscally sober. Deficits matter. Remember, we're talking about Jennifer Rubin is our writer here. It's fiscally sober. Deficits matter. What else? It's intellectually honest. That's good. I.e., embraces objective reality and denying that cuts pay for themselves. Corker rightly dismisses the notion that any tax plan will generate 6% growth. I think you should. It refuses to offload to future generations the responsibility for budget discipline. This Congress needs to deal with the budget ramifications of its own tax plan. And in true conservative fashion, Corker maintains that the status quo is better than a bad bill. Like a doctor, do no harm, and is an appropriate legislative motto. I might add to these observations that no plan should give outsized tax savings to the rich, a recognition of the social and political cost of widening income inequality. Well, I'm glad she's able to acknowledge that. That's a good thing for Jennifer Rubin. Now, if a few of Corker's other colleagues agree with his limits, not only would the tax, quote, reform bill the White House put out be off the table, but so would most other tax-cutting ideas because they would likely add to the deficit. Without substantial tax increases and removal of deductions in other areas, a bill with cuts of the magnitude Republicans want would bleed revenue. We've already seen how eliminating deductions faltered when blue state Republicans raised a fuss about eliminating the deduction for state and local taxes. Moreover, some thoughtful conservatives object to wiping out that deduction on federalism grounds. Stan Vuger of the American Enterprise Institute writes, the central federal authority should play a subsidiary role in our society, only to be activated when local communities cannot solve their collective action problems independently. Our tax code should reflect this idea both as an expression of our values and to ensure that local governments do not see their ability to raise revenue crowded out by federal legislators. So, where does that leave us on the tax bill? That's not a bad point, by the way. Republicans could very well fail entirely, as they did on health care. They could very well go into the 2018 midterms with zero significant legislative accomplishments. Alternatively, they might follow the suggestions of groups such as the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. That's a nice sounding name, isn't it? Which argues, instead of relying on magic bullets and fairy dust to pay for tax cuts, policymakers should ensure rate reductions do not add to the debt. Instead, they should focus on pursuing comprehensive tax reform as has been proposed by numerous committees, and tax experts from across the political spectrum. I am always wary of that, and if they're pointing me towards what was I can't even remember, thankfully, the stupid commission that we put together, the Cat Food Commission, to put together their idiotic report that thankfully fell off the face of the earth. By repealing tax preferences, broadening the tax base, and reducing rates, tax reform has the potential to reduce distortions, improve simplicity and fairness, and grow the economy more, and in a much more sustained way than tax cuts. In 1986, Republicans and Democrats came together to agree on a package that cut some tax rates almost in half, but also broadened the base enough to ensure revenue neutrality. This model will do more to grow the economy, especially for future generations, than simple tax cuts. Back to Rubin here. That would be less politically satisfying for Republicans, whose economic philosophy has become almost exclusively about tax cuts, the bigger the better. This more restrained approach, evocative of the 1986 tax plan by contrast, might please not only Corker, but also many Democrats. For once, the GOP might try going to the Democrats first before exhausting themselves and disappointing their base with grossly irresponsible proposals that have no chance of success. Well, they might, but they won't, because their House and Senate, both in their hands, are filled with people who campaigned on the campaign in a box, and they have no idea what they're doing and don't care, and all they know is, I got here by saying tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts, uber alles, no matter what, I'm going to continue to do so. And for some reason, common sense has been replaced with the common idea that tax cuts are always awesome. And so what can you do? We've populated the Congress with morons, and we're stuck with it for the time being. We will have another election, though. That's a good thing. We have the opportunity to change that. What's the other thing that you sent here? Or is that just, that's just, oh no, there's a second article as well. Some in GOP open to what? What are we talking about? We might as well get back on this topic. Open to discussing Democrats' proposal to ban device used in Las Vegas attack. This gives us an opportunity, I guess, to reiterate the story of the bump stock ban. I'll tell you what, I'll read you the article, but before we do, long story short, they very well may give us the bump stock ban, and we should take it, and we should use it to open the door and try to get a foot in and say, you know, the bump stock ban goes only so far in preventing this sort of thing. High capacity magazines are what make bump stocks work, really. I mean, not physically what make them work, but as I pointed out, any semi-automatic weapon, and this is a good holy grail for this discussion, for this debate, if it ever gets there. And the reason why I don't think it won't, or I guess the reason why I think we'll get, or could be tossed the bump stock ban pretty easily with Republican agreement, is that the truth is that any, or almost any, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. It may, in fact, be the case that any semi-automatic can work this way. Some are a little easier than others by the way the gun is built, but pretty much any semi-automatic weapon can fire like this, with or without a bump stock. The bump stock that they're talking about really is an attachment for assault rifles like the AR-15 or similar. They make them for other rifles as well. But they also make ones that can be used on pistols. I mean, it's not as popular because, as has been pointed out, the bump stock is sold or justified with the excuse that, well, it's fun to shoot machine guns for fun on the range. And people want to do it, but it's enormously expensive and difficult to buy an actual machine gun. And of course, you would have to buy an old machine gun. Machine guns manufactured after 1986 are apparently still illegal, just outright illegal for anyone, for private ownership. But a grandfathered pre-1986 machine gun can be had legally if you fill out all the paperwork and go through the background check and register the firearm and pay this enormous amount of money. It's possible. So if you don't have that kind of money and don't have access to one of the few machine guns being offered for sale pre-1986, then you can approximate that fun, those kicks that you get from firing a machine gun by adding a bump stock to your Barbie doll AR-15. That's all, well and good. Of course, inside the community of gun ownerships, gun nuts really, the bump stock is sold with a wink, wink. It's just fun to do. But really, if you want to stockpile weapons to fight the jackbooted thugs of the government who you truly, openly hate, but honor when it comes to yelling at black athletes who won't stand for the national anthem because they hate the troops, then you can get one of these things, and it's your only hope that your awesome-looking AR-15 will ever be able to stand up in a firefight to the small arms being carried by the jackbooted thugs that will come to put down your rebellion. Nothing we can do about their mortars or tanks or shoulder-fired rockets, etc., but some of that stuff we've buried in bunkers out in the woods, and maybe we'll be able to put up a fight for a few minutes. Anyway, that's what the bump stock is really about, and that's why it gets sold as an accessory for AR-15s more so than as an accessory for pistols. But you can, in fact, use them on pistols, and you can, in fact, as I pointed out yesterday, do it with your bare hands. I don't know if any of you looked up any of the videos about how to do that. It's a little bit of a waste of time, but you can at least do it to assure yourself that it's true. You really can bump fire just about any semi-automatic weapon just with your bare hands, and that's kind of why the ban won't make any sense. But as we discussed yesterday, if the gun nuts were to push back on that, that would give us the opportunity to unearth what really lies beneath it all, which is that it's the semi-automatic weapons themselves that pose this enormous danger. And of course, a high-capacity magazine is the only other accessory you'd need in order to make your bump stock worthwhile. If you can fire like a machine gun, you're going to want to do it 100 times, not just 6. You get the point. We'll be back after this break. We are back now with more of the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And I've got some more news here on hand from Greg Dworkin. Just a short update. I guess we could read a little bit of this later, but I think the most important update is that Monopoly Man is a woman. That's a great disguise. It says here in Time magazine that the person who was dressed up as Monopoly's rich Uncle Pennybags, now we've got a real ID on the fake character, is Amanda Werner. And what a great job she did on that. And more to come, I hope. And maybe we can scan through the article to find out if she was, in fact, ever associated with the Billionaires for Bush group or took some inspiration from them. But very interesting and a job well done. Amanda Werner, excellent A+ for you. And I hope people stuff your pockets with real money at some point in the near future. Okay, where were we with the the bump stock thing? Yes, I think they may give us that one because it's better for them to just give us that bump stock ban, especially if they know, one, they can pretty quickly engineer something that will work around the ban, and 2, you don't even need the bump stock to fire your guns that way anyway, and 3, just to avoid having the discussion move on to the point that it is semi-automatic weapons and large capacity magazines that make the issue here. Without the large capacity magazines, bump firing isn't worth a great deal, but it's worth something. And the fact that semi-automatic weapons aren't really that far off the mark from just plain automatic ones is something that the gun community definitely does not want discussed, because the ultimate result of that, if you wanted to do the sensible thing, if the idea really was we want to eliminate the ability of just any civilian to buy guns off the shelf and fire them into crowds so rapidly that they are mistaken for machine guns, and we need to get anything that can enable this from happening off the market, then you are eliminating the entire currently legal market for semi-automatic firearms. You know, that's just everything. That's basically all they sell, every modern gun there is. And that would just be tantamount to a gun ban, which would be fine for Armando and for a lot of people probably listening to the show. But, you know, if you stop and think about what's actually politically practicable and what you could get away with doing and actually enforce, I think you see that there's a pretty considerable problem. Not that many of you wouldn't be happy to try and take that problem on and see where the chips fall. But that's what you'd really be talking about. In the meantime, though, we'll get this show. Senator Dianne Feinstein will, do well, and we should take the opportunity to discuss bump stock bans. And at least that'll give us the opportunity also to have the discussion of, well, why is it that such a significant portion of the gun enthusiast community is so into having these stupid accessories? But I don't know what'll come of that. Anyway, let's take a look at the article. Ed O'Keefe reporting here for the Washington Post. It didn't work after mass shootings at a nightclub in Orlando, college campuses in Virginia and Oregon, a church in Charleston, or a movie theater and high school in Colorado, or after 2 lawmakers survived assassination attempts, but after a gunman killed 58 people and wounded more than 500 at a Las Vegas concert, Democrats are going to try again to revamp the nation's gun laws. And some Republicans signaled that this time may be different. And again, like I said, part of the difference is that America finally discovered bump stocks because they turned up in numbers at Las Vegas, and because people heard the tapes, they heard what they give one person the ability to do, and they saw the results. And, well, there you go. Or maybe it has a little something to do with the article we just read previously about white-on-white violence. I don't know. I'm sure there's some amount of that involved, too. Stunned by the carnage caused at a country music festival by one heavily armed gunman, and embittered after years of fruitless attempts at gun control, congressional Democrats on Wednesday unveiled new, narrowly tailored proposals to ban devices used in the shooting and revived old ideas to close loopholes and restrict some gun purchases. The fresh push comes at a fractured moment in American politics, but Democrats believe that the scope of the carnage might make a difference. Some senior Republicans dismissed talk of new gun legislation as insensitive or premature. Really? Insensitive? Come on. But ardent Second Amendment supporters said they are at least open to discussing new laws, and one senator said he supports banning certain accessories used in the shooting. Even President Trump might be open to a debate. While he campaigned as a fierce defender of gun rights, this week he said, "We will be talking about gun laws as time goes by." Of course, that just might be a new version of 2 weeks or very soon. As Trump flew aboard Air Force One to Las Vegas to meet with survivors of the shooting, Senator Dianne Feinstein unveiled a bill that would ban bump stocks, devices that can be purchased online for $200. You can make it for $100, to make semi-automatic weapons fire more like automatic weapons. At least a dozen of the 23 firearms recovered in Las Vegas were semi-automatic rifles legally modified using bump stocks. And it doesn't modify the gun, by the way. I mean, I don't want to get into terminology stuff because I always find it so stupid to say, well, if you don't get your gun terminology right, you are disqualified from the debate. I understand that it makes sense that you should expect people to do a little bit of research, even if it takes place after the fact, and learn a little bit more as time goes by and as we finally get the chance to discuss gun legislation. If you're learning on the fly, it's better than not learning at all. But the idea that you can disqualify people from the debate because they get some minor point, or even a major point, really, of terminology wrong, I always found rather humorous. Although if I were willing to adopt that standard, I'd get to write the budget every time because I'd be disqualifying everybody left and right for getting details about reconciliation wrong. Or if you're a journalist, I don't know if it's necessarily journalists that commit this particular sin, but everybody. If you've ever said anything in earnest, like everybody knows it takes 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate, you're disqualified. No more discussions, at least no discussions about process for you, but basically anything. You once said that it takes 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate. That's not true. You got your terminology wrong. You're disqualified from the debate. Never come back. Then I'll win. I'll win a lot of debates that way. But you can't because it's a dumb argument. Anyway, after 20 children and 6 adults, as we all know, were killed in the December 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Connecticut, Feinstein introduced a bill to reinstate a federal assault weapons ban. The measure failed by a wide margin. What Feinstein unveiled Wednesday is drawn from part of her 2013 bill, but focuses only on bump stocks and similar accessories. Hunting accessories would still be permitted. The thing is really well worded because it's short, it's plain spoken language, Feinstein explained, so everybody will know exactly what's banned, no matter how fancy or how simple the device is. I hope so. She called on regular Americans, saying, Mr. and Mrs. America, help us. We know the power on the other side. You have to help us. Feinstein's announcement played out like a scene she had staged several times before. And maybe that's bad optics. I don't know. Just as most Republicans take cues on national security from Senator John McCain, Democrats for decades have turned to Feinstein, whose political career is inextricably tied to gun violence. Feinstein became San Francisco mayor in 1978 after the assassinations of Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk. On Wednesday, she said that her own personal history with gun violence could have been even worse. Her grown daughter had planned to attend the country music festival in Las Vegas with friends, but ultimately did not. Yowza. I know what guns can do, Feinstein told reporters. What transpired in Las Vegas, she said, is taking it into war. By the way, I don't think that I have told everybody about this, but I have mentioned it to a few people in asides and off the air. But now that Senator Feinstein is telling everybody that her grown daughter had planned to attend the country music festival in Las Vegas, I can tell you this. I don't know whether I made mention of the fact that my wife was in Las Vegas during one of the previous weeks, but yes, she was there and staying at the Mandalay Bay. She returned on Friday night prior to the shooting, but as it turns out, the shooter actually checked in on Thursday, so they were there at overlapping times. And although she had no plans to stay to attend the music festival, some of the people she was meeting with at the major convention that was going on there did have such plans. No chance that she was going to wander into a country music festival accidentally or on purpose. So I don't feel like she was in any imminent danger, even if she had stayed longer. But, you don't want anybody you know or love hanging out at the Mandalay Bay if they don't have to during this time frame. But just by way of strange coincidences in the world, I thought I could add that one. But anyway, Feinstein, back to her, says, I know what guns can do, and what transpired in Las Vegas, she said, is taking it into war. Feinstein said she had yet to identify potential Republican co-sponsors, but Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin said he would support banning bump stocks. I have no problem banning those, he told reporters. John Cornyn of Texas, the second-ranking Senate Republican, said that hearings on banning bump stocks would make sense. John Thune, I don't think we called him out on the air yet for his most recent ridiculous statement, said that a potential ban is worth having a conversation about, and some of our members agree with that. If I can remember to get back to John Thune, should I do that now, or should I save that? Did I save in pocket what John Thune said? You may have seen me share it on Twitter at some point, but basically, John Thune's initial reaction to the shooting, he really just did not want to talk about the guns that were at the heart of the issue, and was doing anything he could to come up with a reason why the issue was something else. And I guess he couldn't stop on mental health kind of thing. He didn't have any evidence for that one. So basically, instead, he started to, he just sort of diverged into, well, everybody needs to take personal responsibility kind of thing, which you thought might have morphed into a, like each shooter has personal responsibility for their shootings. But instead, somehow, bizarrely, he ended up on the idea, well, you just got to do what you got to do to stay safe. Like you've heard it, when you're in a situation like that, you got to do what you can to get small. In other words, his response, unthought through, obviously, off the cuff, unreasoned response to Las Vegas was, it's really your fault for getting shot. You're not getting small enough. You're not doing enough to duck. The real true answer to our gun crisis in America is Americans need to become more adept at making killers miss when they shoot at them. And then we won't have this problem. If those 50 people had known better how to make the guy miss, we wouldn't even have heard about this. It would have been a non-incident. It's one of the dumbest things you've ever seen said about anything, anywhere. The fact that it was about a major incidents of gun violence just makes it all the more stupid. But okay, that's what John Thune's been up to these days. Other senior Republicans indicated that the latest tragedy is not going to change their position. Amazingly, the guy who just got shot, House Majority Whip Steve Scalise from Louisiana, who they do note returned to Congress last week after surviving a shooting, and a mass shooting at that, in July, agreed. I think it's a shame that the day somebody hears about a shooting, the first thing they think is, how can I go promote my gun control agenda, as opposed to saying, how can I go pray and help the families that are suffering? Well, I don't know. I think that's pretty sensible, but you're Steve Scalise, so what am I going to do? On Tuesday, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told reporters that it's completely inappropriate to politicize an event like this. He declined to answer questions on the subject. By the way, it was immediately politicized by Republicans. And David Dennis Jr. Had a very clever remark about that. I just happen to have seen it, having been retweeted on Twitter. In response to Think Progress's report on what Republicans were using the shooting for. I guess we'll use that as a jumping off point just for another one of our famous diversions. It's a screenshot here of Representative Ann Wagner, about whom I know almost nothing. But Think Progress reports the following. House GOP says Las Vegas massacre inspired them to crack down on what? On reproductive rights. Yes, instead of gun control, Republicans say the violence prompted a new effort to restrict abortions. How so? I don't even really know, but here's Scalise. Again, Steve Scalise saying, as we mourn the lives lost in Las Vegas this week and welcome. Oh, I'm sorry. It's about Steve Scalise. So this, I guess, must be Ann Wagner giving her little speech here. As we mourn the lives lost in Las Vegas this week and welcome Whip Scalise back to Capitol Hill, we are reminded just how precious life is. The GOP caucus writes in a blog post about new anti-abortion legislation approved by the House on Tuesday. This message weighed heavily on the hearts of House Republicans as we spoke of the potential of life, especially lives cut short, not through gun murder, but through abortion. Yeah, so remember, don't politicize a shooting immediately following it unless you're going to use it to promote Republican agenda items like banning abortion. That's the only legitimate use of the political ramifications, apparently. Okay, well, whatever. I'll keep that in mind. Is it worth continuing here? We'll see if we can dig anything else out that is new or interesting in any of this. But I guess suffice to say, this is really at this point just a survey now of different members that they got on the record saying yay or nay to the idea of having hearings on banning bump stocks. So let's see. Meanwhile, of course, the other reports in the news are that bump stocks in existing inventory are flying off the shelves once again as people react to a mass shooting by worrying that it might actually prompt some sensible response and a ban of the weapon or accessories used that made the shooting particularly deadly, and make sure they buy them before the government bans them so they can have some of the grandfathered bump stocks. Undoubtedly, whatever bump stock ban comes out of this thing, we're going to end up seeing ones manufactured prior to X year being grandfathered into legality. I'm not really sure why they would do that, and I think that they should use the opportunity to push back on that and say, no, we actually will confiscate those things. We're not confiscating any guns, if that worries you. We're confiscating these accessories. They should just go ahead and see if they can push that through. I mean, it might endanger the bill's passage. I don't know. That might be a fight worth having. We might have to talk that one out. Would it be worth losing on a bump stock ban over a ridiculous insistence that bump stocks made prior to a certain date ought to be legal, even though they would be, unidentifiable. And if you 3D print your own bump stock later on, you'll be getting around the ban. I mean, it might end up highlighting the futility of the ban. It might end up highlighting the futility of any of these things that dance around the issue of the fact that semi-automatic weapons of all types can fire this way. I don't know. It would be a very difficult thing. You could lose control of that debate. I'd be willing to strategize about it on the air sometime, but maybe not today. We'll continue on instead with other issues that we have tucked away in pocket and see if there's anything else here that Greg may have passed. I think we've reached the end of Greg's suggestions. Thanks very much for carrying us through for nearly another hour there, Greg. I appreciate it. Let's see. What other things might we add and that I have put aside for our discussion? Switching gears. That'll make things easy. I can bring up a couple other issues that I think are worth putting on radar. How about this one? We all know the story of Tom Price Tagg, the now resigned and now former Secretary of Health and Human Services. New angle on his thievery here and the stealing of $1 million worth of private jet flights around the country. Elijah Cummings, the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, has got his teeth in a new angle on the scandal. Cummings demands documents about Conway's flights with Price. As we said, he's the top Dem on the House Oversight Committee. He wants details, according to The Hill, from the White House about any private jet trips that White House counselor Kellyanne Conway took with former Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. Of course, they should probably broaden that to any flights, private flights she took with anyone, anywhere, for any reason. In a letter to Conway, Representative Elijah Cummings, a Democrat of Maryland, asked for documentation related to all of the private, non-commercial, or military flights she'd taken since joining the Trump administration. There you have it. Very good, nice and broad. According to the Politico piece here, Conway took multiple trips with Price related to the administration's response to the opioid epidemic. Price resigned last week following a series of public rebukes from President Trump and GOP lawmakers in the wake of disclosures about his use of private planes at taxpayers' expense. Interesting. Probably could go unremarked upon here. Nathaniel Wexel is our writer here. It's Weixel. I point that out because of that one little paragraph that we could otherwise normally skip over. Price resigned last week following a series of public rebukes from President Trump. Yes, there were such rebukes. And GOP lawmakers in the wake of disclosures about his use of private planes at taxpayer expense. As if Democratic lawmakers were silent on the issue. Like, oh, well, or is it the case that he knows that they weren't silent on the issue, but that what really works with Price is criticism from Republicans? For a Democrat to say, hey, it's bad public practice for secretaries to waste taxpayer dollars on luxurious private jet travel. That's, who cares? They're Democrats. Republicans said, oh, well, now that's something worth taking seriously. I don't know whether the issue is Price's or Nathaniel's or both, or it's just the slip of the tongue. I didn't really mean that. I should have just said lawmakers, but for some reason I said GOP lawmakers. I don't know. I'm not certain, but just that's what we do here. We highlight such things. Cummings said he wants to know if Conway has any plans to reimburse taxpayers for her trips. You have not made any similar public statements indicating whether your own actions were appropriate, whether you will continue to take such flights at taxpayer expense in the future, or whether you plan to personally repay the taxpayers for the costs of your seats on those flights, Cummings wrote. In a separate letter, Cummings asked acting HHS Secretary Don Wright and Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin for a copy of Price's check. I'd like to see that myself. Just like I'm still awaiting copies of Donald Trump's checks to charities, but I'm not going to get it. The Oversight Committee last month launched a bipartisan investigation into the use of private jets by cabinet officials, but the committee's chairman, Trey Gowdy, investigator supreme, did not sign on to most of the recent letters. Cummings asked for a copy of Price's flight payments by Friday and records documenting Conway's travel by October 18th. The day before he resigned, Price had promised to repay the cost of his travels with a personal check. However, HHS said he would only pay for the cost of his share of the travel, which amounts to just under $52,000 and is a lie. According to the Politico investigation, the cost to taxpayers of Price's trip since May topped $1 million. Yes, again, his excuse, I was only occupying one seat of that plane. But of course, he chartered the plane for himself. The fact that it was empty is his own doing. He could have, I guess, asked for other people who were traveling to contribute toward the cost of chartering the thing, but it didn't matter to him because he was charging the taxpayers for it. The $52,000 thing that he's come up with is completely ridiculous. He owes the government $1 million. That plane should never have been chartered. But, they're not so good at economics or figuring out what things really cost, these fiscal conservatives. Anyway, there is more out there that deserves to be rounded up. And I did say that we might be able to find our way back to the Trump Soho story. I don't know whether that's something we can do today or not. Maybe we can get to the other tidbits that we have here. And if we hang on to this stuff, we can fill out a Good Friday show, too. Also meant to talk to Armando a little bit about Puerto Rico and other issues that may have been sort of flying under the radar up to this point. Perhaps that's a Friday thing we can work out, too. Plus, of course, our Monday show, I neglected to remind Greg that we will be off the air live on Monday, but we will hopefully put together a fresh, brand new show for you of pre-taped material, just so as not to leave you hanging. If you happen to have the day off for whatever you call Monday the 9th, then you should have a good show to listen to. That's the way I look at it. Okay, a couple other short hits that we can add to things here before we take our final break. Here's a bit of news. This one, where did this come from? Newsplex.com. What's that? Oh, well, it's leading me to a CBS local piece here. CBS 19 News. Where's that? Charlottesville, Virginia. Newsplex.com. Okay, well, I guess that's what they call it down there. Charlottesville. It should give you a hint as to what's going on here. Jason Kessler, the organizer of that Unite the Right rally that went so poorly down in Charlottesville, is in some trouble. He has been indicted by an Albemarle County grand jury on a felony perjury charge. A felony perjury charge. Now, it has to do with something else entirely, but it's interesting that he would find himself, one, indicted, and two, indicted for a felony, and three, that felony would be perjury, of all things. According to court records, the charge stems from a sworn statement he made in January. And you'll never believe it, it was an allegation of violence on the part of leftist political activists. So much for the tolerant left. Turns out to be largely a lie. What do you know? And in fact, like an actual lie in which you're charged with felony perjury charges, having uttered it. Court records show that he gave a statement to a magistrate claiming that he was assaulted by James Taylor, not the James Taylor, but a James Taylor. That would be an interesting thing to do. Assaulted by James Taylor on the downtown mall in Charlottesville on January 22nd while trying to gather signatures for his petition to get Wes Bellamy removed from the Charlottesville City Council. Why? Who? I don't know. But that's what he was doing. Taylor said when he refused to sign the petition, as is usually, you're right, Kessler punched him and Kessler was charged with assault. On January 23rd, Kessler swore out an assault complaint against Taylor, writing that Taylor, quote, grabbed the petition and my arm, violently shaking to separate the two. I guess he was trying to shake the thing loose and take the petition away. Is that the allegation? Kessler claimed Taylor screamed an obscenity while making contact with his face to mine. Every once in a while, whenever it needs to be described in such goofy, weird detail, you're talking about an assault that usually doesn't really measure up to most people's common sense ideas of assault. But yes, an unwanted touching by one of another is in fact assault. The only problem is this assault didn't actually happen. We'll have more of the details after this break for station identification. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll continue with the story of Jason Kessler and his felony perjury indictment. He's the organizer of the Unite the Right rally, shorthand known as the mess in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the guy who was in fact chased out of his own press conference afterwards. You may have seen that happen. This stemming, though, from a January incident in which he was gathering petition signatures on the downtown mall and alleges that somebody who apparently refused to sign his petition got in an altercation with him and he says assaulted him. The other guy, of course, says it was in fact the other way around. And like I said, a good hint to whether or not you're really talking about a common sense type assault that you should be bothering the police with is, it's usually not the case if you are relying on the technicalities of assault and say that what happened was that he screamed in an obscenity and his face made contact with my face. Like if you inadvertently bumped noses or foreheads in a close-up screaming match, is it really an assault? Well, technically, yes, it is, but only this kind of pedant idiot would end up bothering the police with this. Usually not first, but as an attempt to try and deflect blame from his own actual assault. The police here said it was Kessler who assaulted Taylor, but just to try and soften the blow of all of that, Kessler decided to file charges saying, no, Taylor assaulted me, so at worst, we're both at fault. Anyway, prosecutors, though, guess what they came up with? Video of the altercation. Uh-oh. And they say video of the altercation shows Kessler's version of the story wasn't true. The assault charge against Taylor was dismissed, and Kessler ended up pleading guilty to an assault charge in April. He was then sentenced to 50 hours of community service. I guess if they knew what he was going to be up to in the summer of this year, they might instead have put him inside for a little while, but maybe not, just for this assault. I didn't see the videotape. The perjury charge, though, is a Class 5 felony and carries a possible sentence of 1 to 10 years in prison and up to a $2,500 fine. Let's get a big portion of that one on the record, shall we? The indictment was handed down in Albemarle County because the statement was made at the magistrate's office located in the Albemarle-Charlottesville Regional Jail, which is in the county. Legal analyst Scott Goodman says perjury charges are rare. It's actually very hard to prove perjury. He said, nowadays, the only cases that can hold up in court and prove perjury is where there is video evidence. And he pointed out that a felony conviction is punished by more than just prison time or a fine. It strips voting and other rights, gun rights. That would be really interesting. It would take away his right to own a firearm, and that is something most people these days don't want to lose, the right to be able to bear arms, says Goodman. Neither Kessler nor Albemarle County Commonwealth's Attorney Robert Trachy responded to a request for comment, but that would be a good person to perhaps take weapons away from. Seems like a rather dangerous individual and an inveterate liar at that. I think somebody ought to think about about throwing the book at Jason Kessler. That guy's a problem child. 1 to 10 years in the pokey will probably make you think twice about right-wing trollery and whether it's worth your time. That would be a hell of an outcome. I do not expect it. Now, to revisit another portion of the show and answer a question that I got on the KITM hashtag. And I remind you, it's out there. Kagro in the morning, KITM hashtag. Easy way to get a comment or question or a redirection of the show if you've got something interesting to share with us, like a link to a cool article that you want included. That shows up and hangs around a little while longer in my Twitter display than simply writing to me, which you can also do at KagroX on Twitter. Here's the question. I've got it from Warlock477. Warlock477, who tweets, says, "The Warlock is in." The display name of the Warlock is in. Hi, Warlock. How are you? Here's your question. So why ban the bump stock device if it makes no difference? A good question. Let me see if I can clarify. I don't know. No, the reason I bring it up is really kind of entirely political, but it's got some policy basis. The bump stock device, I guess I should start out by saying it does make a certain kind of rapid firing easier. That would be the aimed kind of firing. If you put a bump fire stock on a rifle like an AR-15, what it does is it gives you the opportunity to pull off this this rapid firing with some semblance of being able to aim the weapon. I guess I should at this point describe to you as briefly as possible, I hope, how you would, what do I mean when I say you can bump fire a semi-automatic weapon with your bare hands? If you haven't looked online at the YouTube videos, they'll explain it very well visually. They'll show you what you do. But basically all that's happening here is what a bump stock can do is it can capture essentially the kinetic energy of the recoil of the weapon once fired and help you redirect that energy with the way you hold your hands on it. Like the reason it's so easy to do with the bump stock accessory and on an AR-15 is on an AR-15 you can put a forward grip on the AR-15, a downward vertical pistol grip up front. They sometimes call a tactical, grip. Something you can hold on to up front with if you're a right-handed shooter, with your left hand. You can hold not the barrel of the gun, but you can hold the forward part of the stock that where you would ordinarily rest your hand. But a lot of guys like those pistol grip forward grips, and that makes it even more effective. But what ends up happening is you fire the rifle and it kicks backward a little bit, right? And what the bump fire stock helps you do is keep the actual butt of the rifle floating just off your shoulder rather than tucking it in and burying it in your shoulder to absorb that kickback. And it's sort of what you want is the butt of the rifle floating just off of your shoulder or just barely touching your shoulder, and a good firm grip on the forward hand, usually the left hand, forward on the rifle. And you can be, instead of just gripping it and holding on tight, or as you would be doing if you were just making single shots and minimizing the power of the kickback, you might even be pulling the rifle back against your shoulder with that left hand. Instead, you're sort of pushing forward with it and holding your trigger finger steady. And instead of squeezing out each shot individually, you're going to pull back. You hold that trigger finger steady and pull the gun forward such that the right forefinger is forcing the trigger backward for that firing. And then the recoil bounces into the bump stock and doesn't go straight into your shoulder and get buried there. But all the while you're pulling the gun back outward again with your left hand, and the bump stock sort of facilitates that floating state in between your pulling forward with your left hand and floating the butt of the rifle off of your right shoulder, so that when the gun fires, your left hand is pushing it forward again with the recoil bouncing off of the shoulder and bouncing off of the bump stock that's resting on your shoulder, and your finger is already in position to hit that trigger and keep it down again. And it's not fire, release, fire, release, fire, release with your right forefinger. It's just holding down the trigger like you would with a full automatic, genuinely fully automatic weapon. And the bouncing back and forth from the recoil and the pushing forward with your left hand and the ability not to end up absorbing all the impact with your shoulder that's provided by the bump stock, that makes it easy to have the thing. Basically, your rifle is bouncing back and forth with every recoil and with your finger on the trigger so that it just fires every time it bounces forward off of your bump stock and shoulder. You can do it with any gun, and you can do it without the bump stock. It's the bump stock makes it easy to do that with your eye on your target and your rifle raised. That's what makes it a useful accessory. A regular pistol, a handgun that's semi-automatic, can be made to do essentially the same thing with a two-handed technique, whereby you put both forefingers into the trigger guard. The right forefinger for right-handed shooters is on the trigger. The left forefinger is on the front inside of the trigger guard, and you're using your finger. A lot less, force can be applied than with a pistol grip downward, on a rifle. But you're using the bridge of your left forefinger to push against the inside front of the trigger guard to push the pistol forward hard, while your right forefinger keeps the trigger depressed, and you're essentially there having the recoil of the pistol bounce off of the webbing between your right forefinger and thumb where the gun's resting, and pushing forward with your left forefinger at the same time to get that same floating tension that goes on with the rifle. It's difficult to do, and it hurts too. And a lot of the people who do it ended up with their right, or rather their left forefinger cut up, or at least permanently dented. But, it gets pretty shredded pushing against it. Depends on, how is the inside of your trigger guard beveled, will it cut into you or not? I guess if you have a nice smooth rounded one, you just get the pressure and the indentation rather than the cuts. But the same effect can be made with a semi-automatic pistol. So, but, obviously it's somewhat awkward to have both forefingers in the trigger guard, and two, it's difficult to do, most people will find, with a pistol, held out at arm's length the way they're typically trained to aim and fire pistols. The people you see do it tend to lower their hands a little bit, or even shoot from the hip that way. They can get additional leverage with their left arm and left hand to make that bump firing happen. So, in other words, without the bump stock, it's really actually pretty hard to aim. But if you are machine gunning into a music festival crowd, aim doesn't really enter into it. It's not an issue. And of course, if you're having a street fight and you just want to spray bullets around very quickly, that won't be an issue either. So what's the point of banning the bump stock? Actually, the point here would be bringing that up, and the fact that you've got some agreement on the right to move ahead with the bump stock ban gives you the opportunity to then put your foot in the door and say, now, it should be pointed out at this point, now that we have some agreement on the bump stocks being dangerous, that bump stocks are only really truly dangerous in conjunction with large capacity magazines, because a machine gun that fires 6 bullets and then has to be reloaded isn't particularly effective and isn't what was used in Las Vegas. Instead, you're talking about magazines with considerably larger capacity. And of course, also out there are 100 round ammunition drums that are perfectly legal, or were in most cases grandfathered, at least in some states, and are available and widely held by people who accessorize their AR-15s all the time. So large capacity magazines really have to be considered in all this too, especially if simply banning bump stocks isn't going to diminish the ability of any semi-automatic weapons owners' ability to fire rapidly into a crowd. But with 6 shots at a time, that's a little bit more of a tolerable risk than, say, doing so with 100-round magazines. Surely people will just buy a different gun. Yes, they absolutely will buy a different gun. It won't make any difference. The point is that any gun they buy can do this. And I would love to get the debate to the point where we actually have to sit down and say, does everybody know that any semi-automatic weapon can actually do this? What the guy did in Las Vegas can be done with almost any gun, with like 70+% of the non-hunting weapons that are available on the market anyway, though there are plenty of semi-automatic shotguns out there as well. That's a little, I would expect it to be a little bit more difficult to do with a shotgun, but I suppose you could come up with a healthier stock that would be able to do that, a beefier stock. Anyway, the point is that it would get us to a point in the gun debate where we really need to be, which is, do we think that it makes any sense for people to have semi-automatic weapons available on the premise that, well, they're not really fully automatic weapons and so they're less dangerous? They really basically are and always can be converted into one, whether they have a stock or not. And I would love to see that debate, that point be made in the debate. It's not necessarily about the effectiveness of the ban. It's about the effectiveness of the debate to me. I will pause at this point then to bring you a total change of direction. Part 4 of Paula Appanese's ongoing series on the GOP, the Republican Party, as domestic abusers. Total change of direction, but pre-planned at this point, and it's getting near the end of the show. I know we can still fit this in. It's time to roll. Paula, please take it away.
The Domestic Abuse Cycle, a Framework for Our Politics and a Path Forward, Part 4. In Part 1, I introduced my premise. The GOP uses tactics against Democrats that mirror the behaviors and outcomes of domestic abusers, creating a warped environment. In Part 2, I described and gave examples of these tactics, and in Part 3, I described the ineffective response by Democrats, who, like domestic abuse victims, have been choosing to cope with rather than reject GOP abuse. Today, I will address the media's role and Democratic enlightenment. Now let me start with this caveat. There are a number of reasons for media failures. They have been analyzed at length by many and are largely outside the scope of this essay. I will summarize some of the primary drivers as 1. Repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, 2. Purchase of media outlets by for-profit companies, with the accompanying shift from news as a public service to news as a profit center, 3. Media consolidation, and 4. The collective media's reaction to the successful conservative effort to tar all journalists as liberal and therefore automatically biased. This last point is especially relevant to my larger theme. So to resume. I went to medicinenet.com to look up information about domestic abuse, and I ran across a piece about sexual abuse of children. And I'm quoting from this. Sexual abuse is the least frequently reported form of child abuse and is believed to be the most underreported type of child maltreatment because of the secrecy or conspiracy of silence that so often characterizes these cases. Conspiracy of silence refers to adults who look the other way or disbelieve a child who reports abuse. The movie Spotlight dramatizes the exposure of a conspiracy of silence. The saga of Joe Paterno, Penn State, and Jerry Sandusky is another example of conspiracies of silence at work. In an analogous form, the bulk of the mainstream media participates in conspiracy of silence-like behaviors. When covering politics, reporters and editors adopt a position of neutrality, normalizing Republican abuse through uncritical amplification. I want to repeat this. When covering politics, reporters and editors adopt a position of neutrality, normalizing Republican abuse through uncritical amplification. Republicans would accuse Hillary Clinton of some absurdity, for instance, and instead of questioning the absurdity, media figures would dutifully report the accusations, thereby lending them legitimacy. The refusal to evaluate accusations or the track records of the accusers is a noisy form of silence. major media has been silent on the question of validity. Neutrality has also led to the widespread use of false equivalency in reporting, whereby reporters or their editors feel compelled to include some variation of both sides do it in stories that would otherwise reflect badly on the GOP. False equivalency obscures and dilutes understanding of the reach and depth of Republican abuse by redirecting discussions to Democrats theoretically committing similar acts. Donald Trump's numerous misdeeds were consistently partnered with references to Hillary Clinton's single misdeed, in quotes, which was using a private email server. Now, Donald Trump's election both confounded the media and reminded members that they have a responsibility to the public beyond ratings and ad sales. Trump's cries of fake news have inspired an upsurge in serious investigative reporting and a renewed emphasis on accuracy and honesty. Democrats can make good use of this development, assuming they reach the enlightenment and responsibility phases of the abuse pattern. Democrats meet enlightenment. It's hard for people to really see what's going on when they're in the midst of it, said Attorney Joy Wagner. The denial is unbelievable. The victim's view of reality becomes really skewed. As a reminder, Joy Wagner is an attorney who represents abused women seeking divorce. Statistically, battered women average 6 attempts before they finally sever relations with abusive partners. Their ultimate success depends, she says, on how accurate their perception of reality is or becomes. Now, the reality Democrats need to perceive is the holistic nature of Republican abuse. It is a strategy with many interlocking components which keep Democrats entangled in defensive maneuvers, constantly fighting a perpetual stream of individual fires. And, as in domestic situations, long-standing abuse skews people's perceptions about what is normal and tolerable. Democrats are accustomed to living in this abusive environment. Everyone is accustomed to living in this abusive environment. Collectively, we operate as though Republicans behaving badly and getting away with it is some sort of natural law, like gravity. The abuse is so ingrained that we, including the media, don't question it. We may talk about it or report on specific instances of abuse, but we do it the same way we lament a coming hurricane. There's going to be unavoidable damage, but we can't stop the hurricane from coming. But GOP abuse can be and should be stopped. Democrats meet responsibility. Victims of abuse are empowered to change their situations once they place the responsibility for the abuse on the abuser. Republicans are fully responsible for their actions and the consequences thereof. We can't control Republicans, but we can control ourselves, and we need to stop enabling them by excusing, ignoring, downplaying, or tolerating their abusive tactics. We begin by getting a firm grip on the essential problem. The Republican Party's abuse tactics work synergistically to envelop Democrats in an endless loop of outrages, keeping us on the defensive, interfering with our ability to make our aspirations clear and known, and diverting our energy from more constructive activities. Republican abuse confuses and discourages the apolitical and low-information citizen, brainwashes the right-wing base, and enrages, frightens, and demoralizes Democrats and or left-leaning independents. The GOP media machine presents a formidable challenge. The machine provides continuous cover for GOP abuses. Literally, within minutes after some questionable GOP action is reported, you will hear, see, and read the same explanation or justification or deflection from all corners of the Republican media universe. Similarly, when a Republican attacks a Democrat, the machine ensures that the attack will be circulated widely and defended uniformly. Through their consistency, Republicans perpetuate their frames. The media follows their leads about what is important and what can be ignored. Democrats must recognize the insidiously skewed nature of our political environment and judge it unacceptable. They must learn to spot Republican abuse tactics in action and refuse to retreat to enabling responses. Next up, moving from defense to offense.
Once again, amazing and interesting. Thanks, Paula, and we look forward to the next installment. And this will continue. I think we have, what was it? I just read the number the other day as I was searching around for how many installments we have and making sure that we had the new one ready to roll. Part 8. There we are. Will be the finish. That was part 4, so we'll get to 5 tomorrow. We can include 6, 7, and 8 in the beginning parts of next week. This is a rather large undertaking. Thanks very much for sharing it with us. And an amazing thing. And I hope it's opening the doors. It looks like I'm getting inquiries about further opportunities to share original content like this. I hope to be able to bring you more as time goes on. Before we get to do anything else today, though, of course, it's time to get ready to hand the microphones over to the guys on the after show who faithfully bat cleanup for us and bring you all of the other top headlines of the day that we miss out on. I want to do just one more thing before we launch our music and tell you what's coming up on today's after show. One thing that I just definitely have to get on the record. You know it already, but I just wanted to put it out there and have a good laugh about it, I guess, except that it's actually quite serious. But that's the way it is with most of our topics here. Tim Murphy, Congressman Tim Murphy of Pennsylvania, popular, as it says here, with the pro-life movement, or rather anti-abortion movement, urged abortion in affair, texts suggest. Yes, according to this memo here, essentially we've got word that Mr. Murphy, I guess, having had an extramarital affair, even as he crusaded as a anti-abortion activist inside the halls of Congress, was in fact encouraging the woman with whom he had this extramarital affair and had made pregnant at that, to go ahead and get an abortion. Basically, just another example of the Republicans out there insisting that they are against abortion in all cases and taking away the right of all women, except the ones they're involved with, to choose when it comes to what to do about their pregnancies and whether they want to carry to term. Everybody else has to do it, but not anybody who's, in good with me. Poisonous, toxic, I would relate it very closely to the toxic masculinity issue. In other words, I get to decide which children live or die based on my role in their creation. Everybody else has to deal with the consequences of their behavior, but I get to get out of it because I'm an awesome dude. I don't know. There's a lot more to be explored in that. And of course, he has since announced that he will not be running for re-election. I don't know whether I believe that or not, given the fact that, as outrageous as it is, it's happened before. You all remember Scott DeJarle, and he managed to survive that so-called career-ending scandal. He's still sitting in Congress and still running for re-election. So whether or not Murphy changes his mind, I don't know. But in the meantime, we have more to bring you here on Netroots Radio. Next up, of course, our friends on the after show, Wink and Justice, will fill you in on what's going on there. And it's Thursday, so means we get to speak a little Italian and say, thank God it's Giovedì, because that's what they call their Thursday episodes. They have names for every single one of their episodes, but none is more fun to say for me than thank God it's Giovedì. Canadian education leaders warn Education Secretary here in America, Betsy DeVos, to keep her backwards ideas out of their country as she visits Ontario today and tomorrow. Kick her out, at least until you know what's going on. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is caught raising political funds on a government trip to the Caribbean. I wonder how he flew there. And several Oklahomans recount being sentenced to a Christian slave camp instead of prison. I was thinking about holding on to that one either for Friday or Monday, but what the hell? You might as well hear about it here on Netroots Radio and on the after show next. It's an amazing story. I'd like to discuss it perhaps in the future anyway. For the last half, they'll be reporting that ICE officers have struggled to find egregious cases to justify Trump's immigration raids, and Trump insists the Senate Intelligence Committee should investigate the American media for spreading fake news, while at the same time he claims to be the club champion at each of his 19 golf courses around the world. Investigate that.
From Daily Kos Radio, on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks again for listening, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week and figure out between today and the end of the week what we'll be doing for Monday. All of those aforementioned stories, plus the Connect, Unite, Act Daily Coast Community Calendar every day, and more on the After Show with Wink and Justice. Stay tuned. We'll talk to you tomorrow.